The Wraith of Finley Alexander. The horde of wraiths follow closely behind the Reaper, many marvelling at how little they can discern beneath his hood, while an unremarkable skull is no doubt lurking under there, formed of the same bone seen elsewhere, his exposed wrists and digits, whiter than the purest snow. All they can glimpse is shadow, a black vortex from which his booming instructions flow. The Wraith of Finley Alexander is anxious as he floats alongside his contemporaries, a feeling he suspects is shared by all. This huge mass of reluctance being dragged to the frightful earthly realm, ready to witness the severance of their mortal ties.
After collection, you will return to the Judgment Hall,
declares the Reaper.
Your essence will have no desire to remain. Lingering shall only prolong their anguish.
To the Wraith of Finley Alexander, the most fearful prospect is the noise, the turmoil, the total absence of tranquility. He still remembers Finley's abrupt entry into the world, with its blinding light and blood and screaming. How wretched it was to suddenly feel that thumping organ in the human's chest, his painful first breaths, and then the slicing of that funicle binding him to his mother. Gladly in the preceding weeks and months, all visceral sensations started to diminish for the Wraith, his experience soon made tolerable by a sweet and gradual separation. He became of Finley Alexander, discarnate and free of torment. In the shadow sphere, he no longer suffered those bodily concerns, physical pain or discomfort, chronic fear, shame, the pervading knowledge of his own vulnerability. All he had was a top-down perception of Finley, the single piece of the puzzle, and his unique connection to all its surrounding parts. He watched the infant develop into a shy boy of reasonable intelligence, who both craved and resented attention. He saw how the child was affected by his parents' actions, how their triumphs and missteps helped shape the person he'd become. Did Finley live a good life? Hard to say. By the Wraith's estimation, it was full, if wholly unexceptional. The man experienced love and loss and varying forms of fulfillment. He was well liked by most and kept many friends, which suggested that his character was not devoid of kindness and humility. He was prosperous, particularly successful in business, indicating levels of diligence and to a lesser extent patience. However, aside from the odd donation here or there, the man was not generous with his wealth, hence he cannot be said to have exuded the virtue of charity. He also kept grudges, in some cases refusing to ever forgive, overindulged in many of life's pleasures, often comforting himself at the expense of others, and was never wholly grateful or content, all of which would sadly imply that the virtues of temperance and chastity were not truly attained by the man. The Reaper raises his scythe and beckons on the haze of spirits, this tense and solemn miasma floating towards the inevitable. But the Wraith of Finley Alexander is beginning to have deep second thoughts. Suddenly he yearns to linger on in this nowhere world and never meet his maker. Suppose he just refused to follow. What would be the harm in holding on and allowing the rest of the horde to continue without him? Upon this notion, the Reaper's cloaked head twitches towards him, freezing the Wraith of Finley Alexander like a cloud of ice, forcing him to stare back into the dismal hollow, the hopeless void within the hood.
Don't be frightened, child,
the Reaper whispers to him and him alone.
Think of this as a new beginning, rather than the end. Destiny cannot be delayed.
The abyss inside the Reaper's hood relinquishes its hold on the Wraith. Then with both bony hands, the spectral shepherd raises his scythe and punches the sky, bringing the blade down to form a perfect incision, like a scalpel slicing through impossibly delicate material, which duly yields without resistance. With the portal hewn in the shadow sphere, the Reaper is the first to glide through it, his cloak trailing behind him momentarily, a twirl of smoke slowly sweeping into a vacuum. The Horde obediently follows, countless spirits sifting into the domain of their counterparts, the world of Genesis and decay. Pass through the portal, the horde of wraiths descend on the earth in a bleak and brilliant maelstrom, each breaking from the assemblage in turn to locate their dying mortal selves. But in the chaos and confusion, the wraith of Finley Alexander fights against the pool, slowing his own descent. It's easier than one might expect. No one is watching. The others are too preoccupied by their own calls, and the Reaper can no longer focus on a single wayward wraith. The wraith of Finley Alexander knows all too well how the man's story ends. A flurry of ugly violence on his short walk home. What is to be gained from watching this? Will a grand epiphany descend as the blade repeatedly punctures his flesh? During his time in the Shadow Sphere, this wraith has come to secretly distrust and disrespect the process. He bore witness to the wonder of life, just to gradually become a glorified auditor, keeping track of Finley Alexander's every move, steadily passing judgment on his actions. And now that it's all coming to an end, he's expected to take a front row seat at the distasteful climax. For what reason? The Reaper could impress on him that it was all part of some divine plan 1,000,000 times. But it doesn't stop him from questioning it, from wondering if the blind is simply being led by the blind. There just seems far too much emphasis on good and evil for his liking, an unnerving preoccupation for judgment, an alarming distaste for compassion, and worse still, no regard for what should really matter. Merit or demerit, that's all it boiled down to. What about joy, love, nuance? For one last time he wants to glimpse the faces of key players in Finley's journey, to see the ones he grew to understand and share affection with, not the spectacle of a reckless, grotesque murder, a vile, senseless mugging on a dark London side street. So denying his divine call, he drifts to the party Finley is just leaving, floating among Bethany and Lawrence, and several others who he felt blessed to know, or at least observe.
It was so lovely to see Finley tonight,
Bethany is announcing to two other women.
And alone, more's the better.
Jan, the taller woman, laughs.
Oh yes, I forget how much you dislike his wife.
Dislike is not the word, Bethany corrects her friend.
Deeply distrust is better. I find Monique perfectly likeable, on the surface at least.
The wraith of Finley Alexander watches on, intrigued and compelled by what he's hearing. In all the years of observing, he's never been able to hear what others say about Finley in his absence.
You think Monique's a gold digger? Not exactly.
I mean, the woman's a chartered accountant, isn't she?
Hardly a trophy wife he needs. Look, maybe I shouldn't be saying this.
Bethany interrupts, a vague slur in her voice.
So don't spread this around. Let's just say, Monique has expensive tastes.
The wraith listens on, though he knows much of what's being implied. It's true that Finley and his wife have had many arguments about money, large debts the former was occasionally forced to settle. Their union may not be perfect, but few are. After 7 years of marriage, their love certainly seemed real.
Oh, but they always seem so sweet together.
They really did, the wraith agrees.
Things are not always how they appear, Bethany says. From what I hear, Monique's debts are mounting again, and Finley would be wise to cut loose once and for all. At any moment now, Finley Alexander will in fact be doing just that, the Wraith thinks, quickly deciding that there are better places for him to be. He drifts towards Finley's home, despite the pull of the death scene becoming stronger. It feels like he's being torn in two as he passes through a mass of solid walls, working his way through central London late at night. Monique should be home now, awaiting Finley's return, a moment that will sadly never come. And on floating into the living room of their apartment, the Wraith does indeed find Monique there. Uncharacteristically, the woman is sitting alone, drinking scotch in the semi-darkness, appearing anxious and unsettled. Can she sense it? On some instinctual level, does she know her husband is about to draw his final breaths? Monique is then startled by her phone vibrating on the coffee table. She checks it, opening a strange app. It's a messaging platform the Wraith doesn't recognize. It's done. The message disappears the moment it's read. Then the pull becomes too intense to resist. The Wraith soars from the apartment, hurtling through buildings, rocketing through walls and people and trees and furniture. He knows where he's being dragged and why, and no longer can he resist. Finley Alexander is dying half a mile from his apartment, and suddenly the Wraith can physically feel the mortal chaos once more. Deep lacerations in his chest and abdomen, the wheezing final breaths, the panic of knowing they're Finley's last. The Wraith descends upon the dismal scene, finding Finley Alexander lying motionless in a pool of his own blood.
This can't be it,
howls a frightened voice. This is the moment that the Wraith of Finley Alexander finally meets the soul of Finley Alexander. Newly ejected from his mortal body, now a dead husk lying on the pavement, the terrified soul is coming to terms with many fearsome notions at once. He understands that he's just been murdered, that, miserably, this is how the story ends. But the mind of a staunch atheist cannot comprehend how the proverbial lights are still on. How is it that thoughts are still arising? With what eyes is he able to peer down over his own corpse? The Wraith sighs, knowing that it's his responsibility to ease this process, to comfort the poor wretch and guide him on to the next phase. But he has no desire to do anything of the sort. He's resolved to return to Finley's apartment, to watch what the poor wife does next. Find your own damn way, he thinks to himself. I have better things to do.
Who said that?
The soul immediately shouts. The Wraith groans, realizing his own thoughts are not private. I'm the Wraith of Finley Alexander, he grudgingly declares. It doesn't matter, he huffs. Finley is dead and...
Well, I don't see that.
The soul snaps.
And what does that make me?
You are his essence, his anima, the part of him that does not wither with his flesh.
Nonsense. When you're dead, you're dead. I don't believe in an afterlife, pearly gates, a bearded man in the sky who...
It doesn't really matter what you believe. If you agree that Finley, is dead, then your argument is moot.
How is that?
For there to be any experience at all, there has to be something experiencing it. You are that something.
But...
The Wraith feels in the throes of despair. Do all deaths demand this moment of tedious persuasion? Have all the other Wraiths had to reason with a bewildered soul too stubborn to hear logic? Thankfully, however, the soul then abandons the thought and offers no further remonstrations.
So what now?
Is all he utters a good while later. If the Wraith were doing things correctly, the what now would involve a journey to the Judgment Hall, a dreary evaluation, and then, quite literally, God knows what next. But he has other ideas. Presently he's watching Monique, inside the apartment the wife essentially now owns. In the early hours of the morning, the woman is still drinking whiskey alone. She seems so on edge, like she can sense something is wrong.
I don't want to be here.
The soul screams in reply.
Is this what my existence is now? I'm just trapped in this disembodied hell, forced to watch my loved ones live on.
The Wraith sighs. This was your home for 52 years. Are you really that keen to part with it for good? Gladly it appears he has no answer for this, and both the Wraith and the soul of Finlay Alexander remain where they are, trapped in an uncomfortable coexistence, observing the world to which neither of them belong. In the coming days, the newspapers give a vague account of a 52-year-old business owner stabbed to death. From the body, the police recover a set of house keys and nothing else. No mobile phone, no wallet. But strangely, no transactions are attempted with his cards. By all accounts, Finlay Alexander was brutally murdered for an iPhone and a few £100 in cash. As a mere formality, the police question Monique, whose alibi is verified by the apartment building's CCTV footage. But when Finley's enormous life insurance settlement is approved, and the Wraith and soul see the look in Monique's eyes, the truth spills onto them like a bucket of cold water. The soul becomes frantic once more, apoplectic, irrepressible, howling as loud as he did the moment of death.
I wasn't mugged. She had me killed to settle her debts.
This is the first time the Wraith feels genuine pity for the poor entity. I'm sorry. Yes, we can go now.
Go where?
In answer, the Wraith does what he should have done many days before, propelling them towards the portal hewn by the Reaper. But when they arrive, the gateway is no longer there.
It's too late for that.
A familiar voice announces. Faced with the Reaper, the Wraith feebly protests. No, we're ready now. Let us through to the Judgment Hall.
The time for judgment has been and gone. You wish to stay here.
Inside that impossibly dark hood, the Wraith can almost picture a grotesque smile.
Wish granted.
With that, the sorry Wraith of Finlay Alexander hurtles back down to earth, forever entwined with the forlorn soul he betrayed. They wander as one, flitting between two locations, haunting the spot where greed gave way to violence, but more frequently, the apartment in which the murderer still resides. Their anger often surges enough to rustle through the air, flickering light bulbs, rattling cabinets, slamming doors. Though the rational widow, who holds no credence for the supernatural, always reasons such things away, when Monique dies at a ripe old age in her bed, they glimpse her soul as it escapes and immediately try to confront it. But the Wraith of Monique Alexander knows her task. Off to the Judgment Hall they fly.
Hi, James here. I write and narrate all of the stories for Resonant Tales. If you enjoyed that one, please like it and share it around. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'm really enjoying making the videos and I'd like to make more. And I can't do that without your support.